In our national emblem, atop the Ashok Stamp, are four Asiatic lions that symbolize power, courage, pride, and confidence. Should they not have symbolized health, education, imagination, and self reliance? Rethinking the idea of India politically, socially, scientifically is the need of the hour. I welcome to this session three men who are experts in their fields, three men who have seen from close quarters institutions India built and ran fruitfully over the years. So I have with me Mr. Ravi Kumar Gupta of the DRDO, which is the Defense Research and Development Organization, Shri Ajay Lele from the International Space Research Organization, and Shri Ashok Panda from the Supreme Court of India. Now they will be there's Rupa Publications has published a series, a trilogy on institutions that shaped modern India, and all three books are part of this series. Now, I'd like first, before starting the session, because all three subjects are disconnected to each other and are extremely technical, so I'd like to engage all of you one-on-one. But before that, if I could have, opening remarks on these institutions and the journey of book writing that the three of you undertook while, being in government service, that would be interesting. So, Shashok Pandaji, if you could start with you.
Uh, First of all, when we talk of institutions that shape modern India, now we have to understand and define what is modernity, and then we can proceed about the role of the institutions. Modernity, to my mind, is ours is a dynamic society. From a colony, we became a democracy, and for our constitution, there was a constituent assembly, and which had all eminent people of that period. They were all part of the freedom struggle, and sitting together, they framed our constitution. In our constitution, they thought that Supreme Court will be the apex body so far as the judiciary is concerned, and they also made one thing very clear, that is judicial independence. An independent judiciary, rule of law, and judicial review will be part of our basic structure of the constitution. That is how the Supreme Court will envisage, because at that point of time, they thought that since we'll have a federal system of governance, there will be states and unions, and both the entities will have different defined powers and jurisdictions. To also dwell upon the disputes or differences between the union and the states, they wanted the Supreme Court to be an objective and impartial umpire. Then we have our preamble of the Constitution. We read preamble of the Constitution along with our fundamental rights chapter and the directive principles chapter. In order to give effect to all the rights, fundamental rights, the Constitution makers envisaged Article 32, which empowered the Supreme Court to exercise writ jurisdiction in order to implement all fundamental rights. That is how our Supreme Court was born. And at that point of time, everybody thought that the role of the Supreme Court will be to interpret the constitutional law, all constitutional disputes. Along with that, we have so many other issues. Like, now Supreme Court exercise the most extensive jurisdictions all over the, when you compare India with other countries, then our Supreme Court is the most powerful institution. When we think of other jurisdictions like the USA or UK or European constitutions. So that is how, what I feel, our court's journey has been very, very monumental. In the sense, 1950, 26th of January 1950, our journey begins at Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court is faced with challenges from time to time. And my book is about that journey of 72 years. And a journey of 72 years is to be encapsulated in 184 pages. It is a very huge kind of task for me. But I had to rise up to the occasion with all our research work. We are before the general public domain. Thank you.
Get you to speak a few words on your book and on your book writing journey.
Is it for me?
Yes, you can do next.
Okay. See, I spent quite a lot of time in DRDO entire career till 2015, and all the time, and even before joining DRDO, I always had a paradox. I mean, I found many things paradoxical for our country. Our country has been one of the richest countries in the world before the onslaught of colonialism. And even after independence, the country had everything, every resource we have. We have human resource, we have material resources, we have educated people. But then what was lacking? Why people were hungry? Why things don't work? Why our country had to depend on imports for our even defending our country? So that thing right from the childhood was in my mind. And it becomes all the more intense when I joined DRDO. I found that somehow how the bureaucracy works, how the government organization works was very painful to see. Now, it was a chance. One day I got a call, of course, after retirement, it was in 2019, around September or so, and a suite was asking me to write a book on DRDO. It was like dream come true. And but the only problem was there were two problems. Rather, first thing was they wanted to do it in a couple of months, and second thing was that they wanted to keep it within 35,000 words. Now, immediately I was just wondering how to keep the story of DRDO, an organization which was born with the independence, almost at the time of independence, 1948, in the form of Defense Science Organization, when Dr. Kothari was given the charge of the scientific advisor to Defense Ministry. And since then, the entire journey has been a very, very eventful journey. Another aspect is that the DRDO covers the entire requirements, entire spectrum of the requirements of our armed forces. It is not just weapon systems or missiles or guns. It covers the human aspect. It covers the how the people work in different environments. Let me tell you, our country is unique in the world. Why? Because you name any kind of harshest of the environment, and it is there in our country, and it is at the border, in the conflict zones. So our soldiers have to fight in all those conflict zones where you have extremities of temperatures of climate, minus 50 degrees to plus 55 degrees centigrade, extreme cold, extreme hot, complete dryness, and tropical rainforest. So all these things you have to use technologies so that my soldiers work with best of the efficiency. Now, it is a challenge, and that's why the spectrum of technologies DRDO is working, whether it is radars or missiles or soldier support systems, it is very broad. To cover everything and the entire history and the journey and the future prospects in just 35,000 words was a challenge. So when I got down, the biggest challenge was what not to include. And then I thought that if I keep my thoughts restricted with the tag of 35,000 words, it will be very difficult. So I just set it aside and allowed my thoughts to flow. And that's how the book was born. And the book is not only about as the contents say, the index says, the history of DRDO and the various technologies and the products and the future. It is much more. It traces how our country was among the best in the world. We were much ahead of the rest of the world. And then something happened. We lost the race and became enslaved. And when our country was again reborn after getting torn apart into pieces, somehow our journey to rise once again had many blockages. So it also tells those stories which many people don't know, and people, especially the younger generation, they don't even have any idea of how the life was in 1950s and 60s when our country was even forced And our Prime Minister, Pandit Lal Bahadur Shastri, told everybody, keep one day fast because there was not enough food to eat. Today, we are
Yeah.
not only self-sufficient in food, but we are exporting food, we are exporting arms and ammunition, weapon systems, technologies. We are among the top few
Yeah.
countries in the world in terms of space technologies and defense technologies. So things have changed. Now, entire journey and all those things I have discussed in the book. In addition, I have discussed many other aspects which are
Yes.
very rarely talked about.
Yes.
And
We will be
even the
going into
people
all
in
those aspects. We will be going into all those aspects and telling the readers, the interesting inputs that you've put about DRDO and which are scattered throughout the book. In fact, and with the sort of time, with this, word limit that you have, you've done a fantastic job because, of course, brevity is necessary for the reader to pick up a book on a subject like this, which of course has been a big challenge for you. Now we move to Shri Ajay Leleji. So, welcome to the show. If you have any opening thoughts about your book and your book writing journey that you undertook, because ISRO has always been a fascinating subject. Space has always, fascinated generations and generations of children. Although Indian children have been more fascinated with NASA and less with ISRO, but now, in the recent years, with the Mangalyaan and the kind of promotion that Indian space research has got, ISRO's been discussed a lot more. So, how has your journey been, and the ups and downs that you faced while you were writing this book?
Thank you so much. Let me first thank KLF and Rupa for giving me an opportunity to speak on this occasion. I think this was a very fascinating, but at the same time, a journey which was full of challenges. Why I'm saying so is that, like the other two authors over here, they are the insiders from the system. I am a Air Force officer who has been working in a think tank for many years and looking at ISRO from a perspective of national security issues. So for me, I was looking at ISRO from a distance. Maybe that was advantageous to me also. As the title of the entire theme suggests, that this is about institutions that shaped modern India. Here, I would like to say that when you talk of institutions that shaped modern India, when you talk of a modernity, technology becomes a very important element in any sort of a modernity. And if you really trace back the history of India, I think India was never in the zone when India was not modern. Because it is Aryabhatta, the India's first satellite also is incidentally named by him. So the journey has actually started from there. And after independence, we started investing into science and technology in a big way. There's a very famous question which was asked by most of the Westerners, that how come India, which is a poor country where a lot of amount of problems of education, malnutrition, and various other aspects, is investing into regions like space, which could be considered more as a glamorous things, which has got more
Yeah.
amount of inputs required from money, from technology. So the India's argument has always been that we have invested into a space because we are a poor country, because India always understood that if we have to get out of the poverty system, then we need to make proper investments into technology. And that is what is the basic theme of writing this book. That today we have reached to pinnacles in certain, I can say, areas of science and technology where ISRO has achieved greater success. I think that is the thing that we always believe, that if we have to make a progress, if we have to move more towards modernity, we need to make investments into technology. So my entire journey of discussing ISRO in this book is with this premise. And when I started working on it, I found that most of the people whom I referred to also had a same and a similar type of a thought process. It's a very fascinating journey of ISRO. Our scientists have actually touched the sky with glory, one can say. I think when we will discuss it in greater details in few minutes coming now, we'll talk about it more.
All right. Thank you for summarizing your experience so beautifully, sir. So now I'd like to, start a one-on-one conversation first with Sri R.K. Gupta ji, and then we'll bring you, into the conversation at a later stage. So Sri R.K. Gupta ji, if I could just, start discussing your book on DRDO. So firstly, compliments on authoring such a compact yet information-rich book. I know it's compact. You've talked about, the limitations of, working within a certain word limit, but you've traced the journey of the organization since its establishment, and you've elicited that in great detail, and the nation is truly proud of the achievement of defense scientists. So in the preface of the book, you've lamented on how only a few, to quote from your book, only a few DRDO's achievements get highlighted, and that details of its activities, including the challenges and roadblocks, as well as many of its accomplishments, remain away from the public eye. It has also been, emphasized that there's a severe resource crunch, and a nearly perpetual one at that, which has been just one among the many challenges that DRDO has faced. So, can you highlight DRDO's achievements, which, according to you, have not recognized, which have not, got due recognition? Also, along with this question, I'd like to add another question, that there's also a counter view that an organization such as DRDO, that is associated with national defense, should not flaunt its achievements, and that these should receive due recognition only in-house. I want to know, as someone who's given their entire career to DRDO, do you think that's fair? That's a fair demand to make of an organization, that they shouldn't be flaunting their achievements, and that there should be a certain confidentiality towards surrounding defense bodies?
See, your last question I will address first. Yes, there is this old saying in Hindi, "Jungle mein mor nacha kisne dekha." See, it's my opinion that in the entire gamut of technological work which DRDO has been doing related to while fulfilling various needs of our armed forces, very small percentage of which is really classified. The bulk of it can be told to the people, not only to flaunt the achievement, but also to make our citizens aware. See, after all, it is taxpayers' money which we are spending, and the taxpayer has a right to know what is going on. So with that, and not only know, but also to feel proud about it. So in my opinion, the policy which was being followed till, you can say, the middle of last decade, that everything which was kept away from the public eye, was a wrong policy. And it was thrusted upon, maybe it finds its origin in the British colonial period, where the handful of Britishers had to rule over such a huge population. So they needed a tough control on government employees or other government servants. But in an independent country where the entire government is by the people and for the people, it's my opinion that, and firm opinion, that people have a right to know whatever is hidden from the public eye should be absolutely on the need basis, not the other way around, that we are telling the people on need basis. The portion which is kept away should be on need basis, which revealing of the information can damage the national interest. Only that part should be hidden. So this is what a change was brought about. I have mentioned and discussed this aspect in my book in great detail, that what was the need that ultimately we brought in a policy change and took whatever necessary permissions were there. In 2008, the directorate which I was heading, Directorate of Public Interface, was set up, and some policies were laid down, that who will decide what to go out, to be allowed to go out and go out on the public, and in what way and in what manner. I think it was a good beginning. Till that time, almost 10 years, more than 10 years have passed, 12 years have passed. But I think now it has to be further relaxed, and many more things can be told and taken to the public. Now, when
So the beginning of this was in 2008, you're saying? The defense became more transparent and accessible.
Exactly. The Directorate of Public Interface to present, to make a connect with the people and the citizens directly, or through media or through other resources, was taken in 2008. Before that, sometime off and on it was being done, because as per the Government of India rules, every Secretary to Government of India is the spokesperson for his own department. So only the Secretary has powers to speak to media or to public. Rest of the government employees are not allowed to mingle with media or even general public, and they cannot disclose any information, which is that the rules are very strict under the Official Secret Act, which came into being in somewhere in 1925 in British period. So So that is about why, that's why, I mean, when the opportunity to write this book came, it was really a dream come true. I am thankful to Rupa Publications for that,
Yeah.
that giving me an opportunity.
So
And
the other part of the question is the challenges that DRDO faces and the accomplishments which you feel didn't get enough limelight. If you want to highlight some of those.
exactly. See, the times keep changing. The bundle of change challenges which were there in 1948 when DRDO was, the defense R&D was set up and made a beginning, were of a slightly different kind.
Yeah.
When India became independent, we did not have either the knowledge base or the industrial base. So to begin defense R&D, we had to start from a big zero. People sometimes get confused that no, Britishers had left ordnance factories. Ordnance factories are not defense R&D. See, if somebody gives me a recipe for Hyderabadi biryani, and I follow somebody's instruction and start making Hyderabadi biryani, it doesn't become the main aim that I become a chef.
Yes.
So to be able to generate more recipes, to be able to fulfill the needs, changing needs, it's a much bigger game. In that part, India was at a ground level, at a zero level.
Yeah.
Then, whatever technologies you develop, first of all, for developing those technologies, you need many scientific equipment. Our country did not have any of those. Everything had to be imported. Once you have developed the technology, to transform the technology into a product and to manufacture it, you need industry. Somehow our country's planners, see, I have discussed this aspect also. 1948,
Yeah.
the first mega import of jeeps took place.
Yeah.
And that is supposed to be the first scam in defense procurement. And
Yeah.
since then, somehow the entire government machinery, those who were sitting in power, they were all the time singing this song of, oh, we need self-reliance in defense. But at the same time, they were doing just opposite. All the steps taken were somehow to contain defense R&D. I have listed those aspects also very great detail in
Yes,
step by step
We'll
how
so
they,
we'll come to those, but
yeah.
if you could just give an example of how within these limited resources and within the resource crunch that you've talked about being a perpetual one, what kind of innovation did the DRDO exhibit? If you can give one example of like something that you have seen.
Oh yes, I will give you many examples, but I will like to, because of shortage of time, I'll focus on one simple thing. See,
Yes.
technologies and technical aspects, I think if I discuss, many people may not be. See, the resource crunch was at every level. We did not even, our scientists did not even have table and chair to sit in the laboratory. We had to work sometime in, the buildings were actually, though they were not designed to be laboratories. Most of the buildings in those days, they were the shikaras or the resting places of erstwhile rulers, some nawabs and kings. So somebody is working, big scientists today, they are all big names. I don't want to name one or two persons. They were, because everybody is like that only. Having a small, sitting in a small corner, which was supposed to be sometime that a toilet of the king. And you are working there and doing some experiments. And for sitting, even right from the junior scientists to the directors, they were forced to sit on packing boxes because there was not enough money. Whatever money was made available, it was such a crunch, resource crunch. It was being spent on the whatever equipment is required. So that's why that is one big challenge. Resources were a big challenge. Our scientists innovated. Like innovated in what sense? Let me give you an example. When the first the anti-tank guided missile was being developed. Now we did not have the right material. One of the scientists, he went to the jungles of Kerala and identified a particular wood which was very light in weight, and then used that wood, modified it, used foam developed by my laboratory in the Defense Science Laboratory, and combining the two and some other materials, he came out with very, very ultra lightweight wings for the missile. So these were all innovations. I mean, it was not a technology taken from outside. He applied his mind, innovations, and innovated those. The entire missile was a beautiful innovation in spite of very serious resource crunch. It's a different matter that again they import, I call it importiomania. They importiomanic defense procurement czars, they sabotage the project in spite of 400 test firings. The missile was abandoned and we were told to close the work and take up something else. So anyway, this, in my opinion, the biggest challenge was the countering these negative forces, because rest everything else our scientists are capable of taking care. But under government service, you cannot disobey the rule, the orders.
Yes. So along with that, you've used a term in your book, importomania, and you've said it's a disease, a malignant disease which is deadlier than the coronavirus. Now,
Exactly.
you also said it carries, the combined bone-crushing burden of legacy and seasoned bureaucracy. So now I'd like to know, India is one of the largest, still amongst the largest, importers of defense hardware. And some defense analysts have argued that these imports become necessary because production capacities within India have not been developed. Now it's been like decades and decades since independence. So why hasn't DRDO been able to indigenize the production of defense equipment?
See, first of all, you have mentioned the word production, lack of production facilities. The production part does not come under the purview of DRDO. That was another fallacy, that DRDO, the mandate was restricted to only developing technologies. And the production part was with a separate department, which is Department of Production. Now, if the
So you're saying that,
70 long
sorry to
years,
cut you off. So so sorry. So you're
no,
saying that the two departments actually don't, they are different departments. The
they are different
production
departments.
and,
They are different departments. And now the big question I'm asking is, Department of Defense Production is headed by a bureaucrat.
yeah.
Why not that bureaucrat be held responsible for lack of production facilities?
Yeah.
If HAL is not able to, there is some slow production rate in manufacturing Tejas aircraft. Why shouldn't the top person be held responsible and accountable? Nobody holds him because he is a bureaucrat. He is the Ajay Amar Avinashi. He is the all-powerful person, a demigod.
Yes.
Untouchable. Nobody can touch him.
Yes.
So as
You
far as
also
DRDO is
mentioned,
concerned, when the DRDO began its journey, see, in our country, we had three strategic science departments. One is DRDO, the other is in ISRO, and the other is BARC. BARC came into existence a bit later. But the matter of fact is the heads of all these three should have been equivalent to secretaries, which is not the case with DRDO. For a very long time, DRDO chief was made to work under defense secretary, directly under defense secretary, and not reporting to the minister even. He was kept out. Even Dr. Kothari was not even part of the policy making body.
Yeah.
So that was a big fallacy. It was a big challenge how to work. For every small thing, you have to send a file and stand in front of the Babu. कि भाई हमें ये दे दीजिए. So that is a big problem. And
on the
other hand,
benefit of our listeners, I'd like to quote from your book about what you're saying. You've mentioned that, of course, you've said that it's on crippling control of the Ministry of Defense, crippling bureaucratic control. There's a quote that says everything from sewing needles, nail clippers, cosmetics, synthetic yarns and textiles, allopathic medicines, packaged foods, hand tools, and bicycles, machines, metals, alloys, and so were imported. Even for the civilian sector, the task for DRDO had dimensions far in excess of those typically encountered by any other defense R&D organization in the world. So they're clearly within extremely narrow limits. You had to function. Something that doesn't become public information, and something that people are entirely unfamiliar with.
Exactly. See, because no scientist can afford to speak these things in public while in service. And by the end of his service, the person becomes so demoralized as far as the government rules are concerned that he totally loses his interest. There are few scientists who continue to work, but the scientist is a scientist. So once he is a free person after retirement, he prefers to join some kind of a academic institution or an industry and spend time over there rather than, because everybody has presumed that nobody can do any harm to rather than there is no solution to the problem of bureaucracy in our country. Bureaucracy is all pervading you. Any sphere of life you find that some bureaucratic interference is there. I have faced this thing as a child in when I was a student in the school. Both my parents were teachers, and the way they have suffered, they were far more qualified and had much more experience in education with a PhD degree in education, and the person sitting on their head, absolutely some kind of a around 30s or so, and dictating terms, and then after 2 years the person goes and the second person comes and he entirely changes everything. For education policy cannot go on changing in every 2 3 years. But these bureaucrats have been ayaram, gayaram, one goes, the other person comes, the entire thing is changed. I've seen how much pain they have undergone. So much more severe things I found in case of defense, because the defense procurement, if they are done through imports, there is so much of makhan malai in that. And the control is entirely in the procurement. People do not know that it is not the army or the navy or the air force which is doing procurement. It is a small section in the Ministry of Defense headed by Babu who does all the procurement. Yeah. So to blame the army or armed forces is absolutely wrong.
Of course, but you see, an institution like the DRDO, which is into something which is concerns national security, and something that government after government engages with directly and so severely. Do you think the bureaucratic control and bureaucratic pressures on these organizations don't become a matter of interest to governments, and reforming these organizations or reforming the power structures within these organizations, why does it not become a political priority?
Well, when the Bofors scandal took place, the fingers were pointed to whom? So if the top people are involved, how can you expect them to take the right action? I will tell you one thing. I've mentioned in this book, quoting the book written by our former chief, Dr. V.S. Arunachalam. He has mentioned how in the presence of then Prime Minister, the Russian Defense Minister, Dmitry Ustinov, openly threatened our chief to abandon the light combat aircraft project. He was openly telling him that we will provide you whatever aircraft you need. We understand your needs better. You better close this project and stop working on this in this area. If that can happen, and the top person was present. So how can you expect them to take the right decision? The DRDO should have been made autonomous like ISRO and BARC right from the beginning, right from the day one. It didn't happen. Even today, it is not autonomous. Even today, the DRDO remains a typical government organization. But in my opinion, the science cannot flourish. The research and development cannot flourish in a typical Sarkari setup. You need autonomy. And when you say autonomy, there are so many things involved, but let us say we have already talked about resource crunch. See, what happens in ISRO and BRC, the budget is provided. How to use that budget, it is all within their purview. Once it is given, the money is given, it is to them to spend on the human resource, how much to spend on the new technologies, how much to spend on current technologies. It is all their decision. They are taking well thought of decisions and they are capable. Even similarly, DRDO is also capable, but it doesn't happen in case of DRDO. You have to get the approvals from someone else. So
how difficult is it to get approvals if you want to engage the private sector in India in manufacturing? Because in August last year, the DRDO, the Defense Ministry, announced a list of 101 items that were to be that will stop importing. Like they'll stop importing these 101 items. So, are you going to engage the private sector in India to aid in manufacturing?
Say, I am very glad that you raised this issue of private industry. Unfortunately, the governments of the day since independence kept the private sector completely out of purview of defense products till 2001. And the only catch was which DRDO took advantage and interacted with the industries. And by 2001, we had close association with more than 1,000 small and medium sector industries and some large industries also, because at one paragraph in our mandate says that until the product is, the specifications are sealed, we could help the civilian sector, the industries in technologies. So taking advantage, because private sector was not given permission to manufacture the complete system. So for the components and subsystems, we took their hand. We also did hand holding, because in those days, the private sector industry was not at that level. So we had to do complete hand holding. They were not even capable of build to drawing. You give them drawing, but they cannot manufacture. So you have to be constantly interacting. Today, those industries, the same industries 40 years back, which we interacted with us, they have reached a level, not only build to drawing, they can now build to specifications. You provide a specification, they will give you the product. And many of them have reached another higher level, that's built to requirement. You define the requirements and they will give you 5 designs and you choose among them. So that's the kind of interaction we did. But some reason, again, the government, the people who were in power, they should explain why they kept the private sector away. 2001, under Dr. Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, the private sector was given permission to manufacture these items, but the policies take a lot of time to change. And I mentioned in the book how then scientific advisor Dr. Mantharam, he took the advantage, and the Pinaka became the first product for which the manufacturing was allowed to be given complete. The product was manufactured by the private industry.
Yeah. Now, what happens when the private sector gets involved is that the bidding for production, and then who gets the bid, because these things become political as well, as we've seen with Rafael in the past, and the recent controversy. So it's not entirely smooth sail for any government or any system, because there are complicated narratives attached to defense and national security, and a whole lot of money that's involved. But coming back to the industrial bit that you've talked about, that this also requires an industrial ecosystem that's conducive. So the DRDO's role, like you said, our role is certain, and production is not our role. So is it the DRDO's role sort of restricts to developing technologies? So as as the foremost research organization, does its role not extend to assisting to productionizing technologies? So you see the next level is now this: if private players get involved and if private industries get involved. So how do you look at the future, say the next 5-10 years for DRDO?
First of all, DRDO's role also involved helping the industry to productionize. Our role is developing technologies and then design and development of the product, proving the product, and taking it to production but not itself. It has to work with the designated. Till 2001, every industry was designated. Like it is missile, it has to be the public sector undertaking, the Bharat Dynamics Limited. Similarly, for aircraft, it has to be Tejas. So for every product, the government agency was defined, and DRDO had to help them in manufacturing it. But ultimately, we were supposed to help them, but we had no control over them. How much time they take, whether they take proper quality control measures or not, DRDO did not have any control over that, because that they all come under the Department of Defense Production, headed by a bureaucrat. So that is another aspect. But today now things are changing. I am thankful to our Prime Minister Shri Modi ji that he is giving lot of emphasis to Atmanirbharta in every field, not just defense, but every other. And for defense, now he is the complete 101 product list has been identified as a positive list for Atmanirbhar Bharat. That means these things will be produced only in the country. Second, a very big change which has come is in the policy 2020 we have announced, the government has announced for defense procurement. There they have given lot of support to the private industry. And I think now the time has come when the private industry should come out and take some risk, take advantage of these policy changes, and make our country completely self-reliant in defense. As far as technologies are concerned, I can assure DRDO is capable of developing any system, any kind of technology you name, and within a very short period of time, we can develop it. For whether it is the recent example is the corona. Within a few months, we came out with so many products for fighting coronavirus. So similarly, as far as the radars are concerned, or the missiles or the aircraft, we can develop technology, provided we are allowed and given free hand. I think even now, I request our government and our Honorable Prime Minister, sir, that at least now we should take a decision and make DRDO an autonomous organization. And let it be free. Give the scientists a free hand, a free mind to work and innovate and take India to further heights, new heights.
So, do you think institutions today are autonomous? Because given the political control on institutions, autonomy is something that seems to be disappearing. What is your take on that?
See, I would say when we say autonomy, what does it mean? Autonomy always has to be calibrated. After all, we are in a democracy. We cannot, any of the institution, whether it is government institution or private institution, no one can enjoy 100% freedom. Even if suppose I own a company, it is totally my venture, my money. But then am I free? I have to abide by the government rules. So that the rules should be such that I am forced to work only in the interest of the nation. Now, how does it happen? If the autonomy, where does the autonomy, what is the meaning of autonomy for an organization like DRDO? The meaning of autonomy is that you allow them, okay, whatever budget you have allotted, now within that budget, let them decide what is their promotion policies, what are their spending policies, which area to spend, which area not to spend, and what new work to be taken up. Complete freedom has to be there. Plus, whatever you are developing, which within a framework of policy. So autonomy stops here. The policy has to flow from the polity, from the government top. But within that policy, in a transparent manner, the DRDO should be able to select the best production partner. Till recently, it was not the case. You have developed the best missile, but there is only one production agency, BDL. You have developed the best aircraft, but it has to be manufactured by. I'm not saying that nothing wrong with BDL or HAL. They are fantastic organizations. But the matter of fact remains that when you have bounded the technology, even if that particular agency X has all its hands full and cannot do more production work because of various reasons. After all, that agency, whichever department of they all come under Department of Defense Production. They have to take again command from somebody at the top. So they are also not autonomous. For namesake, HAL and BDL and these organizations are corporatized. So apparently it looks like as if they have a freedom, which is not the case. They are bound by somebody sitting in the MOD, give them directions. So yes. there is a person who will tell, okay, no, slow down, Tejas. We want to import.
In the spirit of Atmanirbharta, you'd want less of bureaucratic control and more autonomy, so that DRDO can be free, build its capacities, build technology the way it has to, and not be crippled by rules and regulations, and especially seasoned bureaucracy, like you called it, and these sort of constant approvals for little things that you have seen work suffer because of in the DRDO. Thank you so much, sir, for joining. We'll have you back on shortly once we are done with the other two authors. So it's a great book on the DRDO. He detailed the history of the organization, the current problems plaguing the organization, and the organization's interface with bureaucracy and with political systems. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Now we'll have Shri Ajay Leleji. If we could have him on screen. He has written a book on the ISRO. Welcome to the discussion, sir.
Thank you.
I hope you were listening to Shri R.K. Gupta ji as well, who's authored one of the books in the trilogy.
Fascinating discussion. Very fascinating discussion.
Yes, there are a lot of things which we don't know about organizations like the DRDO and the ISRO, and it's only in a very political sense or in very limited news spaces that stories around these organizations emerge. So thank you for your very well written book that tells us a story of India's journey in the field of space since the time of independence. So the book chronicles the contributions of pioneers in the field, whether it is Homi Bhabha, Vikram Sarabhai, Satish Dhawan, MJK Menon, APJ Abdul Kalam, and other great scientists. So let me begin with a rather, foundational question, a foundational point that you've raised by seeking your response to a question that you've yourself raised in the book, where you say that there are some who question the relevance of space activities in a developing nation, and this is something you touched upon in your introduction as well. That there are, problems of malnourishment and lack of education, and people don't have. There's hunger. India is also on it keeps slipping points on the hunger index as well. So a country like this developing its space science and pushing people out in space, how relevant is it and how necessary is it? So if you could just dwell on this a little bit and explain the reaction that ISRO receives and the political attention it gets, keeping this in mind.
I think if you really look at it, let me pick up from the previous speaker. The
Yeah.
good thing with ISRO is that ISRO directly reports to the Prime Minister of India.
Yeah.
So there is a less amount of a bureaucracy which is involved into it, and that's a very important element to it. Now, coming back to your question, the most important aspect of a development of a ISRO, I think one has to go back to the pre-independence history itself. By the year 1944, 1945 onwards, it was becoming clear that it's only a matter of time that India will get independence. That
Yeah.
time, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had started requesting the scientists who were already getting trained abroad or working abroad that since we will be having an independent country, we need to have a policy as far as development of science and technology is concerned. And there were a good amount of scientists who responded to his call and got back to the country. Dr. Vikram Sarabhai was one such scientist who got back to the country. So if you essentially look at development of an India space program, first it started becoming as a part of India's atomic energy program because the first scientific organization, in a sense, which was involved in that time was atomic energy. Because not because of any other reason, because there was no other scientific organization involved. So there was Dr. Bhabha there, Dr. Sarabhai was there. These are the two people who started working, actually creating some sort of a, one can say, a theme of how India should make developments into science and technology. Atomic energy was extremely important because of the energy aspects of it. You know that if a development of a country has to take place, energy becomes a paramount importance. At the
Yes.
same time, also, there was a realization that space is extremely important. Here, I would like to quote one example. Now we are waiting for the Tokyo Olympics. But in the year 1964, there were Tokyo Olympics. And in those days, those Olympics were telecasted live to United Nations by using a satellite technology. So this was one of the reasons why person like Sarabhai, who realized that this is a great technology which can help a poor India to develop further. His thinking was that if we have to get out of the poverty, it's not that we have to only make water available or something. We have to start from the basics, and the basics is in education. A vast country like India, where there are certain islands of, we can say, educational prosperity, but at the same time, you got far-flung villages where the education just can't reach. So he decided that let's have a program where you will have television sets put into smaller gram panchayats, villages, and all that, and a educational training could be given by using a satellite technology. Today, in a COVID era, we say that, oh, entire world has realized that how best education could be by using a digital medium. But if you go back to India's space program, in fact, we did it very successfully during early years, where education was the key as far as India's space development was concerned. There are two to three other important elements which were required to be looked at. One important element was weather, because India is an agriculture economy. We all understand that vagaries of weather impact agriculture hugely. So you wanted certain amount of correct inputs to be given to the farmers by using satellite technologies. So our initial investment to satellite technology started becoming for the purposes of getting weather, for the purposes of using it for education. And now, if you are getting these technologies at hand, and if you're not able to transmit it to the people on the ground, then it is of no use. So then we started making investments into communication sector also for satellites. So the development initially started, if you really look back at India's INSAT program, it is one of the most unique programs in all over the world. Because today you are very habitual of seeing that, oh, we launch a satellite for weather, we launch a satellite for communication, we launch a satellite for remote sensing. But we started with so much less amount of money that we thought that just can't afford satellite dedicated to each and every aspect where you require. So our INSAT program essentially became a program where a satellite was a multi-purpose satellite. Nowhere in the world in those days, a multi-purpose satellite idea was there. So we started looking at India's needs. If you really look at the way Sarabhai has articulated why India wants to invest into a space, there was a very clarity of a thought that we want to invest into a space for socio-economic development. And to my mind, the same agenda even continues today. We started making investments into INSAT. Then we started making investments into one of the other most successful programs called IRS. In my book, I have dedicated one chapter for which is covering these two major technologies because these are the path-breaking technology. Subsequently, once you know how to do about it, you can just develop on it. But the initial periods of the book, of course, is not having any sort of photographs. But I'm sure many of the listeners must have seen the photographs where in a bullock cart we are carrying our rockets, on a cycle people are carrying the rockets. So we started with almost nil. But we had a very smart group of scientists. I must make a mention it over here. It so
Yeah.
happens that if you're close to the equator, then
Yeah.
the geography of a particular country allows you to launch a satellite system which is slightly more cost effective. Because when you
Yeah.
have to carry something out into the space, it costs huge amount of money to carry that sort of a weight. So I'm not getting into the scientific details of it, but the closeness to the equator helps. So that time, India realized, the scientific community realized that, oh, we are at least closer to the equator. Can we
Yeah.
exploit all this? There was a
Yeah.
US program and a United Nations program which was going on in the Indian Ocean region, and they were looking for a launch pad. So we immediately locked on to a place called Thumba in Kerala, and we decided to tell to rest of the world, those who were interested, that if you want to launch a sounding rocket, we got a launch facility which can be made available to you. So if you really go back to the history, India's space program started from a church into a village called Thumba. Why it started from a church? Because it was the only permanent cemented building at that point in time in that village. The other advantage of that village was that the geomagnetic equator also passes through that. So the world community got attracted towards India because India was making a launching site available. So naturally, India picked up on making certain amount of collaborations with agencies. So we collaborated with US, we collaborated with USSR, we collaborated with France. So we started learning all those things in a very smart fashion, one may say so.
Yeah. So the impression of a common man who is following up developments during last year's standoff in Eastern Ladakh, the impression they got was that India's capacity to see the other side of the hill was very limited, and that whatever we were able to see as such has been sourced from foreign sources, perhaps paid for. So, as a security expert from the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis, do you agree that there is a critical deficiency exists?
You see, what happens is that you are looking at space for what purposes? Like I
Yeah.
already made a mention that India invested into space for socio-economic development.
Yeah.
The critical element of a defense has started becoming important now. So now
Yeah.
our investments are slightly getting taking care of the defense requirements also. One must understand a little amount of a science behind all those things. Your
Yes.
low Earth orbit satellites, which are supposed to be the remote sensing satellites, or in a military parlance, what we call reconnaissance satellites. That means that gives you information on the ground. Like you must have seen in media also, Galwan Valley, they were showing a lot of amount
Yeah.
of a satellite pictures, finger one, finger two, and all that. So all those
Yeah.
pictures come from your polar orbiting satellites. Now those satellites are continuously moving from one pole to other pole. So you just can't have one satellite and get a 24 by 7 information available. So you require a battery of a satellites for that purpose. India started making investments into those sorts of satellites. and we have got certain amount of gaps which are existing in between what we call in a space parlance the passes of the satellites. So there were few drop zones when we don't get a information available to us. We are trying to manage it with other things. We are trying to boost up our satellite development technologies also in such a fashion that we will have that sort of a 24 by 7 cover. But it takes time, and no country in the world is having that sort of a facility available because it requires huge amount of what I can say investment to be made into the satellites. So again, you are making some sort of a cost benefit analysis out over there and trying to see that how you will get certain amount of a boost to your military capabilities also. Because if you really look at ISRO is, as the name suggests, it is a space research organization. So their basic mandate is to do research. All of a sudden, we got a problem at a border. So ISRO can't tweak their program just like that because rocket science, after all, is a rocket science. You just can't wake up in the morning and say, "Oh no, today I want a satellite which will look at China or which will look at say Myanmar or something." So you need time for all those things. Now we have started making investments into these things. If you are following the debate on military aspects of a space also, we have now developed a defense space agency. So things are there. It will take time, but at the same time, the communication requirement of armed forces have been already taken care of by launching satellites. In the year 2013, we launched a satellite, a dedicated communication satellite for Indian Navy. They call that satellite is Rukmini. And in the December 2018, we have launched a satellite for Indian Air Force. Now there is a demand for a satellite for Indian Army, even your border management services also. The MHA also requires a separate satellite because BSF, ITBP and all that, they all are there out into the border facing the similar type of a situation which the armed forces are also facing. So they also require all those things. So there is a plan towards it, but definitely it is taking time and it will take time.
Coming to your point about Vikram Sarabhai, where you mentioned where you were talking about how benefiting India and India's social development. In fact, you quoted this in your book also, that rocket science that assists India in its social development. So, if you could give us, say two examples of what ISRO has done recently for the people of India and for the social development of India, and
Uh,
or examples which you think are the most pertinent ones and maybe need a little more attention than they've gotten.
You see, there are 2 to 3 important cases which we need to understand. Like I was
Yeah.
making a mention of a weather satellite. Gone are the days when there is a tropical cyclone hitting, say, Andhra coast or Orissa coast. Uh, People will lose their lives. Now we get a very early warning about a possibility of a cyclonic storm hitting the coast. So over a period of time, India Meteorological Department, along with the people from ISRO, have developed a technology by using satellite imagery, satellite pictures, that we do get an early warning of tropical cyclones. We had incidences where thousands of people used to get killed. But today, if you see, there is only a problem because you just can't avoid a tropical cyclone hitting the coast. What only you can do is that you can allow the people to get out of that place and go to the higher places where that sort of a dangerous weather activity will not happen. So we have actually invested a lot into developing a cyclone warning technology, and it has actually given benefits as far as India is concerned. Other thing is that since we are talking in a COVID era, telemedicine is again a very important aspect of ISRO, which is usually not being spoken into because what is seen into media is moon mission, Mars mission, and all those glamorous sort of stuff. But telemedicine is again a very important thing. The way I was talking of education, today you got say trained doctors in AIMS or major hospitals only, but you got patients who just can't reach to the main cities. There are
Yeah.
small clinics which are available into villages. So how you are managing the activities over there? So there is a management of activity where a doctor in the main cities, the major doctors are consulted in real time. So there is a doctor and a patient, say in a particular part of a village, who is interacting with a doctor sitting in say Mumbai or Delhi or any other place, who is an expert on that particular type of a disease or something, and a correct diagnosis is made. And this has been existing for many years now. It has come very handy during COVID period also, but almost for last 10 to 15 years, the system is fully operational. The other aspect of a socio-economic development is your management of a land resources. India is a very unique country. Like Mr. Gupta was talking from a defense point of view. If I have to carry that somewhere further, you got places in Rajasthan which gets a temperature as high as 50 degrees Celsius, plus 50. You got places like Dras in Kargil sector and all that, where on occasions the temperature goes down to almost minus 50 degrees Celsius. So that's sort of a challenge which is there as far as India's land resource management is concerned. You got thick forests into your northeast part of the country. You are a peninsular India. So you are getting all those cyclonic storms and other stuff. The Himalayas is again a different problem. So management of a land resources is a critical thing. The moment satellite technology comes into being, the moment geospatial engineering comes into being, ISRO has got a program called Bhuvan. So there are a lot amount of programs where the exact management of all these things are concerned.
Yes.
You got a lot of materials which are available, that is the minerals and materials into the earth of India. But how do you identify them? So there are various technologies which are being used, and a space technology is again one technology. So if you really look at it from land resource management, your forest reserves management, management of your major weather systems. Today somebody comes up and tells that this year's summer is going to be extremely high. Why? Because now you got a climate data which is available. Then management of your education, management of your telemedicine. So there are vast amount of activities where ISRO is involving itself. Couple of years back, I think Prime Minister had taken a conference where he had asked every government department that ISRO has got these facilities. How best you're using those facilities. So today, so happens that it could be said that there are certain facilities which are available which may be getting even unused by the departments because the data is available. That's why if you follow the recent government of India policy, that now they are making that data available to the private sector also, because private sector was purchasing that data at a huge cost from other countries or other satellites. So all those things are happening, and that's the reason I will again repeat that India's space program is essentially for socio-economic development.
Yes, this idea that ISRO is not just, putting men in space or putting orbiters in space, but also, to deal with a lot of problems that the country faces on ground here. So the limitation of understanding what ISRO really is something that your book has clarified really well. You also dwelled upon the very sad case of, eminent space scientist S. Nambi Narayanan, where talked about the political interests of the Kerala police and the vested interests that they would have had, for the benefit of our viewers. If you could highlight a little bit of that, because his name was cleared in 1998, and then he was supposed to be awarded a compensation of X amount, and then the Kerala government decided they will give him, a certain different amount, which they took a call on. So, something about the people who are working in these organizations, the kind of problems that they run into, and the political interests and the vested interests of certain state governments or even a certain central government. How can that damage their careers and their prospects? And how demoralizing it is for other people in institutions like these.
I think it's a very relevant question because as of the last 2-3 days only, a fresh sort of a debate has started on the same issue. But
Yeah.
more than an individual, let me try to focus on why an individual of that stature could have been brought into these types of problems. You see, we have to go back to the history of India's space program. Today, India is a very good as far as launching of a satellites into low Earth orbit is concerned. We have got a vehicle called PSLV, that is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, which has actually given us a lot amount of a leverage as far as taking various other programs also. Because even your moon mission, Mars mission also has been Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle has been used. Actually, this launch vehicle is used for launching of a 2,000-ton maximum satellite into a low Earth orbit. For the benefit of readers, what we call a low Earth orbit is around, say, 1,000 feet above the 1,000 meters above 1,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Now, the question is that your communication satellites or your weather satellites are into what we call a geostationary orbit. That orbit is around 36,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So we never had that sort of a strength with our launching system because we lacked a technology called cryogenic engine technology. Now, cryogenic engine technology is a technology which is required to launch heavy satellites because your communication satellites are normally 4-ton, 5-ton satellites, and they have to be put into a geostationary orbit at a height of 36,000 kilometers. So we were always going outside to launch our satellites. Even as of yesterday, we are going to Ariane space, a major launching system which is available for launch of heavy satellites. So India wanted to have that cryogenic technology available with us. So after the end of the Cold War, we collaborated with Russia, and it was decided that Russia will transfer that technology to India. I'm talking of a year 1991. That time Boris Yeltsin was in power, and the president of United States, Clinton, had put tremendous amount of a pressure on Boris Yeltsin, saying that if you transfer this technology to India, you will be going against the MTCR, that is Missile Technology Control Regime norms, and India can use this technology for launching of missiles and all that. If you really ask me, there was no logic into these things, because if you really look at India's space program, it is one of the most unique programs in entire world, where it is not an offshoot of any missile program. You go to US, their space program is an offshoot of a missile program. You go to France, you go to any other country, their space program has been an offshoot of their missile program. That means first you launch missiles, and then you use the same type of a rocket technology for launching satellites. But India's, like earlier speaker was explaining, DRDO has got one of the most successful missile programs. But their missile program started in early 80s. ISRO started doing their job well into early 60s onwards. So we started independently. So as far as ISRO and DRDO is concerned, other than you had few scientists shifting from one place to other place, there's no commonality. So India's program was independent. So the argument which was given that India should not be partnered with cryogenic technology actually had no meaning. But you know how geopolitics happens, and India was denied that technology. So India decided that India will start making that technology. To make that technology, there was a major project which was there, and the same scientist, Mr. Tamil Narayan, was in charge of that project. Now, if India would have achieved the cryogenic engine technology within, say, next 2 to 3 years, or say 5 years also, it would have been a major boost. The major countries possibly were not interested in having that. So how you corner an Indian scientist into that? There is a major possibility that it was by design that he was unnecessarily cornered into some sort of a stupid argument that, oh, he is involved into these things and all that. And the poor person suffered for many years. And only now his name has been cleared. So there's a reason why a person of that stature was cornered, because he was heading India's cryogenic engine program. And trust you me, subsequently, the scientific community got so much demoralized. There were a lot of things which happened, and India took almost 2 decades to develop a cryogenic engine technology. Because you're running program where everybody was geared up, everybody was in a great mood to invest into technology. So what, we don't get a technology, we'll develop it. So that sort of a thing got somewhere at the backdrop, and the scientific community suffered, and we took almost 2 decades to develop a cryogenic engine technology.
Yeah. My last question to you is now, with SpaceX entering the scene and this commercialization of space that's happening, do you think space will no longer be the global common the way Antarctica is, and there's going to be one country that's going to be colonizing the, say, Mars, or there's going to be a lot of competition now to control space?
I
Gone
think
are the days of the International Space Center. There's going to be now, with private players entering and private entities entering space. Do you think it's going to change the dynamics of space entirely?
I agree with you. I strongly feel the dynamics of space is likely to change. Like when I was a child, when I was going to a college, I always used to listen to the stories that, people are going to reach to the moon, colonization will happen and all that. But nothing that sort of happened during, say, last 2 to 3 decades time. But now
Yeah.
actually there is a possibility, because Elon Musk has started making huge amount of investments, and he has got a good success also. What has happened is
Yeah.
that the countries have understood, because you see, if you go back to the history, why the USA went to the moon, it was just because they wanted to prove to the to the USSR, the erstwhile USSR, that they are better of them into technology, because USSR had sent a Gagarin, the Yuri Gagarin, the first human being into the space. So that was a Gagarin moment. It impacted hugely onto the minds of the politicians over there. But after reaching
There's
the
also
moon,
political competition between the USSR and the USA.
Exactly. So that's the reason the moon program was undertaken. You
Yeah.
had Neil Armstrong going there and few other astronauts also going there, generally jumping around, coming back with few stones. They never knew what to do over there. But now why we are looking at moon is that we have understood that there is something which is known as helium-3, a substance which is available on the surface of the moon only. If you can get that substance back, you got all nuclear reactors which requires plutonium, uranium and all that. If that can be changed over by helium-3, the scientific calculations are that it is so beneficial that if you can get one Boeing load of a helium-3 back to the surface of the Earth, it will resolve the energy crisis for entire world for 10 to 20 years. So the scientific calculations are so huge. So that's the reason countries like India, countries like Japan, countries like USA, now you got a lot amount of other missions also. You got countries like UAE, which has done a recent mission to the Mars also. So people have started understanding that space is going to emerge in a big way. Why countries like UAE and other people are investing into it? Because the countries in the West Asian region understand that oil has got a finite lifetime. So tomorrow, if they have to depend on something to boost up their economy, they need to require certain amount of investments into technologies which are going to be the technologies of the future. And that's why these countries have now started investing into a space. And that is the reason why people have started talking that we can reach to the moon and Mars, because there is a lot amount, not only a technology competition, there's a lot amount of a business which is also been associated with it. People like Elon Musk of Tesla and all that, they are not interested into other than business interests. They do not have any sort of a military interest, but indirectly the military interests are going to come up. You were making a case for International Space Station. One country which I must make a mention over here to look for is China. Huge amount of investments, major success, major success. If you look in isolation, China's program is a very dreamy program, and they have actually worked wonders over a period of time. But from a security perspective, that country becomes a very major challenge. That's the reason United States of America has come out with a independent vertical of armed forces called Space Force. So things are going to be very fluid. There is a business interest, there is a strategic interest, there's the economic interest, then socio-economic interest will continue to remain. So the future is going to be very dynamic.
Thank you for summarizing that and the multiple interests that are attached to space research in today's time, whether it's military, whether it's private, whether it's economic, social, so many interests and so many sectors aligning with something like space, which is considered a very distant subject, a very and it's sort of elusive, but it's not so much. If you happen to read Shri Ajay Lele's book, he makes it very real and makes it very on ground, something that's happening around us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have you back shortly. Can we get Shri Ashok Pandaji?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Am I
yes.
audible?
I hope you've been you've been tuned into the two discussions that we've had.
Yeah, it was a great experience to be in the company of our great authors, illustrious authors. I heard Mr. Gupta as well as Mr. Lele, and it was really fascinating. So, fine. I mean, we can continue our conversation.
Yes. So I have a journalistic background, and we share a love-hate relationship with the Supreme Court. And most of my opinions, I mean, I wouldn't have so many opinions about the DRDO or the ISRO, but I do have opinions about the Supreme Court. So if let's start with, say, the pendency of cases. An appellant has to wait weeks, months, years to get justice, and we talk about justice delayed, justice denied, and this is what we talk about in every rape case, every dowry case, every other crime, and every time someone is waiting for justice. Why doesn't the Supreme Court not just the Supreme Court, in fact, why doesn't the judiciary understand that the physical courts in this country are less, and we need more and more judges and more physical courts, so that a lot of these cases can be addressed? This is not something that government after government has been talking about for some reason.
I completely agree with your concern. I share your concern. I'll say the problem lies here. Whenever we are talking of pendency areas of all the cases in different courts, not only Supreme Court, but from courts below, from trial court and all those things. For that, I would say both the institutions, that is the Supreme Court, the judiciary, as well as the executive, they have to work together in the area of appointment of judges. Appointment of judges is something which is very close to my heart, and we have been also asking for transparency in the entire system. As you know, appointment of judges, so far as the lower judiciary or subordinate judiciary is concerned, there are a lot. I mean, a lot of things have been achieved, but still it can be improved upon. But so far as the High Court and Supreme Court judges are concerned, actually, if you see now, the kind of vacancies are there, they are really alarming. And at the moment, Supreme Court is also seized of the matter. The hearing is going on as to how to expedite the entire process. They say it should be done in a time bound manner. So, like almost we have vacancy up to 50% in almost all high courts. I mean that is the situation right now. Along with the vacancy, filling of vacancies, the most important problem is to go for right kind of appointments, to choose right kind of people having, I mean, independent attitude, independent mind. So those things are very much necessary. I agree with you. Then all the organs of the state, they have to work together. Unfortunately, there are so many bottlenecks. I would not like to go into that right now, but I share your concern.
Yes, I cannot overcome the temptation to seek your view on the relationship between the Supreme Court and the media. You've actually mentioned with a free, I'm reading out from your book, with a free hand, individuals, corporations, bureaucrats, and legislators are openly criticized. You've gone further to state that in this frenzy of people criticizing and targeting each other, the Supreme Court has taken a firm stand against the criticism directed towards judiciary and judicial pronouncements through its use of law of contempt. It has been instilled in the public and the media that they should not disparage the judiciary by attributing motives. Now, something like contempt of court. Say when people are tweeting or when people are putting out, say, a Facebook post, do you think something like contempt of court damages? Do you think it doesn't damage free speech? Because ultimately, if you're using your private handle to write something, do organizations or bureaucrats or institutions in this country feel so threatened by civil society using its private tools of expression?
I'm all for freedom of speech. Free speech is essential to the functioning of our democracy. That is number one. Number two, so far as the use of contempt of courts, the proceedings are concerned, powers are concerned, I think the institutions must be circumspect in utilizing those powers, because our institutions are not that weak that a tweet will be weakening a system or an institution. I mean, that kind of approach should be there. But unfortunately for us, we are living in a very difficult time where people are not accepting tolerance. There is so much bitterness that every authority tries to invoke the harshest of law against free speech. And I'm really worried about that. For example, suppose someone is not agreeing with the executive, the rulers of the day, then you just invoke sedition. You say, okay, I mean, now we'll hold you up for sedition, or we'll hold you up for provisions under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA. Okay, so these are things I'm very much concerned. And so far as the Supreme Court is concerned, I would always appeal to the institutions, saying they should also be circumspect. So far as free speech is concerned, we must respect free speech. Without that, there will be no social progress. Our society will be again going back to the dark ages. That is for sure.
But isn't that contradictory to then again contempt of court on individuals who, because they may be millions of people with millions of opinions. So how does the Supreme Court decide who to get in a contempt of court case and who to sort of let go of? How is that decision made?
Yes, I'm all for the courts not using the power of contempt. I'm all for that. And wherever it is possible that truth can be a valid defense, then also, I mean, the court should refrain from using the contempt powers. I'm all for that.
So, Justice C.S. Kannan wrote a letter to the open letter to the Prime Minister accusing,
Yeah.
say, 20 odd judges of the Supreme Court of corruption. And, four judges of the Supreme Court held an unprecedented, sort of media, conference where, they were protesting about how the Chief Justice had been exercising his powers as the master of the roster. So now, do you think it's about time judiciary also reflects to what is happening within it? And it's no longer, given the incidents that have taken place in the recent past, it's no longer this all pristine institution where everything seems perfect. So, as your take of somebody who's been inside the system, what do you think is really going wrong? Is this the communication? Is it the heavily politicization of judiciary, or was it always politicized, and we only get these incidents these days in the media?
When you are mentioning about Justice Kannan,
Yeah.
I would like to avoid that issue because I don't agree with his approach at all. I mean, it is very difficult to defend his position also. But
Yeah.
broadly, I would agree with you that yes, I mean, the institutions must have that sense of introspection. They must look inside and they should try to improve themselves. That is always, I mean, that is always there. And I would like to tell you about some of the historical facts. It has happened in the past also. And there also you will find the institutions have come up after correcting themselves. So that is how it is. But to my mind, actually, I would like to present another point of view as far as what I want to do with my book, why I have written the book. I mean, I would like to you to dwell on that. My first concern is developing legal literacy in the country, and especially legal literacy among the young people. It goes beyond the lawyers, judges, or law students. What I'm trying to say is that our literate people, unfortunately, they are not into legal literacy. Unfortunately, they are not aware of their law, their legal rights or law. Okay, and
Yeah.
they are, I would say, that unless our common citizens are aware of their legal rights, of their legal system, then it becomes very difficult. And for that, I would always plead for having, say, some kind of exposure to our
Yeah.
school students. At the school level, students should be taught about our institutions, how our different
Absolutely.
judicial institutions function, and how people can have their rights. I mean, knowing your rights is the basic thing. And apart from the literate masses, I would say it is much more necessary for our poorer segments or say the vulnerable sections, the women, the Dalits, and the Adivasis. I mean, I would always go for that. If we are able to just educate a few of their rights, that itself is a big achievement. That is what I would like to think. Maybe you can ask some questions on that.
Yes. So, I also wanted to know, is the standoff, between the collegium and the government have not, it hasn't exactly been uncommon, and it's, been, it's sort of regularly reported. So
Yeah.
now, my question to you is that you've mentioned of the collegium system and
Yes.
being as, as being always been viewed as an interim measure until a fairly and properly constituted commission, a National Judicial Appointments Commission for recommending candidates for appointment was established. So, don't you think that a credible selection system for appointments of higher judiciary is an intrinsic feature of modern India? And this is
Of course.
something that that we should be putting in place right away.
See, unfortunately, in spite of all the Supreme Court judgments, the MOP, that is this what is it? Memorandum of Procedure, is yet to be finalized. I mean, that speaks of the kind of situation we are in. If there is, I mean, if both the executive as well as the judiciary are on same page, then this MOP should not have taken time. But it has taken time. It is a fact. What can you do about that? I mean, I also really feel concerned, but I mean, as a common citizen, we have to bear with that. I mean, I would expect that good sense will prevail over both the institutions, and there should be common ground for expediting everything.
But do you think that to push, a policy like this, to push a framework like this, the bureaucracy and the judiciary both have to be united? And if we see that the way in which the judiciary is bifurcated today and the way it is polarized today, do you think such a decision is not being you're not able to take such a decision because there's so much of, fragmentation within the system?
Sorry, it is not bureaucracy, it is the executive. The executive is much higher than bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly.
So unless
Yeah.
the executive, that is the political executive,
Yeah.
and the judiciary, they are on the same page on this memorandum of procedure, MOP. I think it is a very difficult situation. And now also the issue is pending before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court is trying their best to expedite all process of appointments. I mean, they want that it should be in a time bound. Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, there's more detail on this in a chapter titled "The Basic Structure Doctrine" in
Yes.
your book, which is a very good chapter because it details the problems really well. So there's a quote from your book: "The powers of government, which had become seemingly infinite, were being curtailed by the Supreme Court, which declared various actions the ultra vires the constitution, and that the judiciary became an impediment for the government to execute its socialistic vision for the nation, leading parliament to essentially rewrite the constitution itself and supersede the judgments passed by the Supreme Court." Can you explain the reason for writing this paragraph and what do you think the problem is?
I'll take some more time on this to dwell on the entire thing. See, so far as the basic structure doctrine is concerned,
Yeah.
is essential to our constitution and essential to to the rights of every citizen. Now, how did this idea develop? There are two sources for development of this idea. One was Professor Dietrich Konrad. He was a professor in the University of Heidelberg. With the German experience, he started talking. He was visiting Banaras Hindu University and different places, and he was advocating the cause, saying, look, the legislature does not have the power to alter the basic structure of the constitution, and he was giving the German experience. The Nazi party, without doing much, they could come to power and alter the entire system. And that is how the Second World War took place. The Jews were massacred and all those. The genocide took place. Okay. And then he started talking about, he said, look, we have to think of extreme situations. Extreme situations means what? Article 21 is taken out. Okay. Or say India is divided into, say, Tamil Nadu and rest of India. So you think of that and you say whether legislature has that kind of jurisdiction to alter the constitution like that. And this particular idea was conveyed to Mr. Basic structure doctrine. So it was argued in Golaknath case by our the leading lawyer at that point of time, and he advanced the argument. But in Golaknath, because the court was taking the view that legislature did not have the power to amend any part of the fundamental rights chapter, any fundamental right. So the Supreme Court said we do not have to go into it. Then when the matter came up before the Supreme Court in Keswanand Bharti, it was Palkiwala who based his argument on this basic structure doctrine. He advanced it, and finally, when there was difference of opinion between the majority and the minority, it was the opinion of Justice H.R. Khanna that prevailed, and he stuck to the idea of basic structure. But in our judicial precedents, there is another source, that is the opinion of Justice Mudhalkar in Satwan Singh versus State of Rajasthan. In that judgment also, Justice Mudhalkar talked about basic structure. So when you look at the whole thing, now Supreme Court said in Keswanand Bharti, Parliament no doubt has the power to amend the fundamental rights chapter. Specific rights could be amended by the Parliament. But at the same time, Supreme Court enunciated certain aspects which will belong to basic structure. Then what is basic structure? Democracy is part of our basic structure. Secularism is part of basic structure. Your rule of law, independent judiciary, judicial review, then your even Article 21, various aspects of Article 21, that is right to life with dignity, that is also part of basic structure. I mean, it goes on like that. So that is how I would say basic structure doctrine is paramount to defend our constitution, and for every situation. We are concerned about so many things. So, like suppose a particular political party has very, extensive majority. For example, like the Congress during Rajiv Gandhi's time was 3/4. They were enjoying 3/4. Now the present government also enjoys two-third majority. Now with two-third majority, can you change the basic structure? Therefore, Supreme Court says no. There is an implied limitation to the to this power of amendment of the Constitution. That is how they say, and I would always plead for retaining the concept of basic structure, and we should all citizens should have that freedom. Yes.
Now, you have dwelt, at some length about subjects like triple talaq, marital rape, decriminalizing adultery. So now, should not an institution that is cardinal to the making of modern India be more clear cut and definitive in its stance on such matters that are, predicated on fundamental rights? Because there's a quote from your book that says, Supreme Court refused to entertain a 2019 PIL seeking the framing of a law to make a marital rape a specific ground for divorce. Instead, the Supreme Court washed its hands of the problem by granting the petitioner liberty to approach a higher court with the petition. So, something like this is a more definitive sort of a view is expected from an institution like the Supreme Court.
See, so far as Supreme Court is concerned, I have been very respectful, very deferential, and I have refrained from criticizing them in any manner. And there is an object behind it, because I always feel that all citizens, especially the younger people, younger generation, must have respect and hope. No one should lose respect and hope towards the institution. That is how, from time to time, we can improve upon the situation. And the Supreme Court also has the responsibility to look back to its legacy, the kind of legacy it inherits. That is why all the time I have been talking of the great judges we had, like Justice Gajendra Gadkar, Justice Gajendra Gadkar, like say Justice V.R. Krishna, Justice Bhagwati, Justice Chandrachud. These are the icons. Justice D.A. Desai, Justice Chinnaparity, they are the icons we should be proud of, and the way they handle different situations. And that is why I have spoken extensively about the development of public interest litigation. I would like to tell you about public interest litigation also. Broadly, it developed in India in three phases. Initially, the Supreme Court was concerned. That was immediately after emergency, after this 1977, because court had that guilt that perhaps we, succumb to the executive pressure and all this. Then Supreme Court developed the idea of public interest litigation by expanding the concept of standing. That is, whether only the person who suffers should come, or anyone who can come and espouse the cause of another person. So that is they call it standing. Then in Bandhuva Mukti Morcha, where I was appointed a court commissioner by the Honorable Court, there actually the idea was, how do you find out whether someone's liberty is curtailed? Like, how do you say this person is a bonded level? Therefore, the Supreme Court directed us two persons, Mr. Ashok Srivastava and me, to visit different places. We interviewed people, we submitted our report, narrating the kind of dismal situation they were living in. And basic thing was, they were all denied minimum wages. And they had no freedom of movement. Someone will come pick them up, they will give them some advance or something like that. And people are living in very, very dismal conditions. So Supreme Court said, okay, this is how we can develop our litigation by deputing our court commissioners, and we can exercise our writ judiciary. And that is how the entire public interest litigation concept developed. Then it has come to the environmental issues. After that, the issues of governance, that is transparency and accountability in the governance system. I mean, that is how the public interest litigation is a very big tool for our democracy.
Yes. Among the emerging issues that you flagged, you've also talked about the right to privacy, and the passive role that the Supreme Court has been playing in this in the aspect of privacy and dealing with matters that escalate. So now you've used a very interesting phrase of balancing privacy with public administration. Can you just highlight your views on this, and how do you think the Supreme Court should be approaching privacy, and are they doing a good job?
See, right to privacy. Just you might have seen only today or yesterday, or Justice Nariman in another case, he said right to privacy is equal to right to personal liberty and life and personal liberty under Article 21. That is how this right to privacy has been given such a high position. Otherwise, there was no explicit mention about right to privacy. Just like USA, in USA, right to privacy developed is a basic right. After 90 years, it started with Justice Louis Brandeis. That time he was a student or a scholar, and he started espousing the cause of right to privacy. And as a Supreme Court judge of USA, he developed that idea, but he was a minority judgment. And then finally in USA, right to privacy was accepted to be a basic right. In our country also, it came up like this. In India also, we had Khadak Singh.
But sir, sorry to cut you off, but looking at the future of privacy, because given the situation that India is in today and our dependence on technology and the personal private data that is out in the public domain is a lot more than it was earlier in the pre-Aadhaar days, which is why privacy is becoming such an explosive issue now. So what kind of like a sort of an advanced policy, a more forward-looking policy, can we expect something like that to the Supreme Court to intervene and to come up with better laws surrounding?
Supreme Court doesn't have legislative powers. Okay,
That is
they
true,
can
but from a judicial,
Now let me tell you about how the concept this right to privacy faces challenge not only from state agencies but from other private entities, especially the commercial entities. For example, I have no choice as a citizen. Whenever I'm using any apps here, application, I'm asked to agree. And the moment you do not agree, then you have no access to that application. Okay, so that is how the private agencies, entities like our Google or other Facebook and all the entities, they are master. They have control over our life or our right to our privacy. Okay, and they are making use of commercial use of our privacy. Okay, which I'm totally opposed to, and I say that there should be proper regulation so far as the private entities are concerned, so far as the government agencies are concerned. Also, we have laws in place, but they are not followed. For example, I mean, if my telephone is going to be tapped, so therefore there is a detailed procedure as to how a government agency can go about tapping the telephone of the private citizen. But it is never added to. The regulations are never added to. Then what do you do? I mean, yes, private citizens, you stand helpless. I mean, that is how it is coming. And it is for the media to highlight the issues that right to privacy must be respected by private entities as well as government. I mean, that much I can tell you.
So you're saying the right to privacy must be restricted?
Respected. It must be respected.
Yes. Yes,
must be.
So when I said the laws, I meant the Supreme Court intervening when a certain law, the way a certain law is being implemented. Unless the Supreme Court makes positive intervention, the law can go haywire and take any shape. Which is why the Supreme Court exists in the first place, and what makes it a great institution. So now, can we have the other two authors back on? So we could, have closing remarks and sort of close this, bring this session to a grand close. So So I hope the two of you have been tuned into our little discussion on the Supreme Court. It's sad that we have very little time and there are three authors. So this is just the same problem that you all faced with your books of brevity and condensing these issues into a short time span, like short word count space. So before we close the session, I want each of you to tell me about the respective institutions that you're in. If there is one dream that you have for those respective institutions, where you'd like to see them in the context of Atmanirbharta, in the context of where the country is headed today, and balancing state and civil society, and engaging citizens in a healthy way, and ensuring that this country draws maximum benefits out of these great institutions. Shri Aarti Gupta ji, if we'd start with you.
Yeah. Say, if you talk of the dream, I always dream that my country become number one in the world, because it has the great potential. It is not just an emotional bond. It has the potential. Once upon a time, we were the top countries in the world, maximum GDP, highest education. So we can do it once again. And in that, DRDO can play a very vital role, a key role, because the defense technologies and the defense sector plays a very vital role in driving the country's technology as a whole. It has been doing it. At the same time, the economic value is so great. So DRDO, I would like to see emerging as the world's topmost institution in terms of defense R&Ds and niche technologies, not just the current kind of contemporary technologies, but what lies ahead. The world is changing very rapidly, and the new kind of emerging technologies, new problems are emerging very fast. In fact, the technologies are shaping the new war theaters, and the emerging war theaters are demanding more and more new technology. The space is one frontier, the cyberspace is another frontier, deep sea is yet another frontier. So many things are emerging. And I would like DRDO to emerge as a top leader in defense technology and contribute further. It has contributed a great deal in nation building so far. Can contribute much more. The potential is much more if the bureaucratic hurdles are removed. I hope things have improved in the last 4 or 5 years under the present government, and I very sincerely hope that they keep on improving further, so that the country becomes the topmost country in the world in terms of we can become the topmost exporter of the arms and weapon defense products. So I am sure it will happen. It is my dream.
Well, Shri Ajay Leleji, if you could, dwell a little more about where you'd like to see ISRO, say, 10 years from now, and the understanding of ISRO, the way the common man understands its exercises.
I think ISRO has earned a reputation for itself. But beyond that, ISRO has earned a reputation for India as a country. What we call in the context of a power balance, ISRO has given India a soft power status. Because today, if you really look at ISRO space program and the impact which it has made onto the minds of the big players also, today you have got USA, Israel, the countries which can send satellites into the space coming to India and asking ISRO to launch their satellites. Two reasons: because ISRO can provide a most efficient and a reliable system. At the same time, it is a cost benefit. That's why USA can launch satellites in a lesser amount of money than using their own launchers. So there is a great potential for ISRO to expand on these things. So there are a lot amount of commercial activities which are happening. It is not the job of ISRO to get into the entire commercial domain. But now the time has come that India should look space as an agency which will give it advantages in a socio-economic development, in a commercial sector. At the same time, it will raise India's soft power status, and military is again emerging as an important element into it. So I think India need to look at the space as a domain beyond ISRO, where it is going to use it for the purposes of economy, for the purposes of foreign policy, and for the purposes of military in a very proactive, efficient, but at the same time in such a fashion that it is going to help the mankind. Because even if it is using for the military, it is not for wrong purposes, but it is to allow the country to provide a deterrence against the people who are trying to show eyes to the country. So one has to really look at space from a positive dimension, and one has to invest into space technologies for the development of mankind.
Ashok Pandaji, about
Yes.
how, if you could, if you could just talk about how to depoliticize the Supreme Court and to establish Supreme Court again in the minds of like civil society as an autonomous, independent body, and a judiciary as a separate pillar of democracy.
For me, judicial independence is the most cherished thing actually, and the Supreme Court must strive to maintain the judicial independence. That the institutional integrity must be maintained, and with that, I would always suggest that the Supreme Court should strive to bring about or promote social justice. Social justice is the most important thing to be happening to our country, and that will be our future. And then this equitable justice also is very much, it should be there. Like, I mean, Mahatma Gandhi used to say, whenever you think of any task that you have to perform, then you think of the last man standing, that is the Antodaya. So also our institutions should have that kind of idea. And I would just conclude my presentation with only one quote from Justice Louis Brandeis, and that is very relevant to our discussion. He said, I quote here, our form of government, he was very venerable justice in US High Court, in US Supreme Court. Our form of government, as well as humanity, compels us to strive for the development of the individual man. Under universal suffrage, every voter is a partner of the state. Unless the rulers have in the man education and character and are free men, our great experiment in democracy must fail. It devolves upon the state, therefore, to fit its rulers for their task. It must provide not only facilities for development, but the opportunity of using them. It must not only provide opportunity, it must stimulate the desire to avail of it. That is the need of the hour today. I would like to thank you, Pallavi. You have done a marvelous presentation. I mean, it was the most difficult task to bring three authors. And the way you have conducted, I'm really thankful to you. I'm thankful to Rupa, as well as I'm thankful to Kalinga Literary Festival. I come from Odisha, so I have great affinity for Kalinga. I mean, that you know. So thanks.
I'd
And I
like
would,
to thank the three of you for writing such detailed books. We could have, made this session sort of sensationalized it with a lot of, questions on politics and questions that, get people excited on Twitter. But we instead chose to focus on your, specific areas so that people who are watching can learn about these institutions, and what goes on within these institutions, how difficult, how challenging, how interesting it is to run institutions like these that make our country great. Thank you so much, Shri Ravi Kumar Gupta ji, Shri Ajay Lele ji, and Shri Ashok Panda ji for joining us. And it's a great series of books that we'd like to recommend to readers, especially young Indians who should know a little bit more about great institutions that shaped modern India, as it's titled.
Thank you, Pallavi. You have been really marvelous and brilliant in conducting this session. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we close the show now. Thank you so much, KLF, for having us.
बढ़िया है,
Then, Sudhanshu.